Imagine this, the very thing we call growth, the engine driving our economies,
Yeah.
is actually killing our planet.
We've been told more is better, more production, more profit, more consumption. It's drilled into us,
Right,
really.
what if the truth is the exact opposite, just
Yeah.
completely flipped on its head?
What if less
Yeah.
is the only way to survive? I mean, genuinely survive long term.
Jason Hickel doesn't just challenge capitalism, he dismantles the myth of endless growth and exposes how it's pushing humanity toward collapse. It's a pretty stark warning.
Yeah, this isn't just another economics book. It's a wake-up call to rethink everything we believe about progress. Everything.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emma.
And I'm John Heil.
Welcome to Book Podcast Zone.
It really is a pleasure to be here. We're diving into some pretty heavy but incredibly important stuff today.
We really are. Today we are undertaking a deep dive based on sources provided by one of our listeners, actually. They wanted to quickly grasp the core arguments of Jason Hickel's critique of perpetual economic growth. You know, the ideas largely coming from his work, especially around post-capitalism.
Right. So our mission, if you will, is to sort of extract the essential nuggets from his argument. He builds it chapter by chapter, connecting this really quite radical historical analysis with practical ways forward.
Exactly. We're essentially trying to create a shortcut for you, the listener, to understand why Hickel argues our current definition of progress is, frankly, fundamentally broken. And, crucially, what he thinks we should do instead.
And this goes way beyond just, criticizing the system. Hickel really forces us to confront a difficult fact.
Yeah.
That this economic speedometer we're all watching, GDP, basically, the demand for it to go up year after year, he argues it's intrinsically linked to planetary collapse. It's not an unfortunate side effect. It's baked in.
Wow, baked in. Okay.
Yeah. And we're going to trace that link right back to what he describes as its violent origins. Then we'll look at whether technology can really fix it, these sort of techno-fix ideas.
The silver bullet solutions.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally, we'll really immerse ourselves in the details of his blueprint for an economy designed differently, designed for human flourishing, not just endless capital accumulation.
Okay. Quite the journey ahead. Let's start at the beginning then, with those origins. All right, section 1. Hickel starts way back, doesn't he? Not with spreadsheets or factories, but with, well, he paints this almost gripping picture of humanity's original relationship with the earth.
He does. It's quite evocative. He talks about pre-capitalist societies, ancient communities living in a state of, relative balance, sharing essential resources, water, forests, grazing land, and operating under a worldview that saw the natural world very differently.
How so? Different from how we see it now.
Fundamentally different. Not as inert property, just stuff to be owned and sold, but as something alive, interconnected, often sacred even. There were relationships, obligations, a sense of belonging to the land, not just owning it.
And he's deliberately pushing back against the standard story, isn't he? The one you often get in Econ 101.
Oh, completely. That standard narrative suggests capitalism just sort of emerged naturally because it was the most efficient system.
Yeah.
And that it replaced this backward Malthusian world where everyone was always starving because of natural scarcity.
Right, the idea that life before capitalism was just nasty, brutish, and short.
Exactly. Hickel flips that entirely.
Yeah.
He argues that the kind of scarcity we grapple with today, the systemic insecurity, it wasn't natural. It was created, manufactured even.
Okay, created scarcity. That's a big claim. How does he back that up? Where does he pinpoint the change?
He points to a key historical turning point, particularly in Europe, starting around the 1300s. It wasn't a smooth transition. There was this, as he puts it, fierce storm of change.
A storm, like upheavals.
Yeah, big time.
Right.
Periods of significant peasant revolts. Things like the Black Death, ironically, shifted the power balance because labor suddenly became scarce and more valuable. So ordinary people rose up against the really oppressive feudal systems. And for a time, in some places, they actually experienced a kind of freedom.
Freedom in what sense?
Freedom from total dependence on a lord. Land was often held in common, meaning communities had shared rights to use forests, pastures, rivers, the essentials for survival. You could subsist, perhaps not lavishly, but you could get by without being totally reliant on wage labor or a landlord's whim.
The commons. We hear that term a lot. So this period of relative freedom, it didn't last.
No. And Hickel argues it was seen as a direct threat by the elites, the landowners, the aristocracy. The backlash that followed wasn't just about restoring order. It was incredibly brutal and very deliberate. It aimed to fundamentally restructure the relationship between people and the land.
Okay, this feels like the core, the deep dive detail, as you said. What was this restructuring?
It's the process known as enclosure. systematically, often violently, stripping lands from the commons, fencing them off, literally, declaring them the exclusive private property of wealthy landowners.
Can you break down enclosure a bit more? What did it actually mean for an ordinary person when the commons were enclosed?
Imagine you're a peasant. Before enclosure, you might not own the forest, but you have the customary right to gather firewood there to heat your home. You can graze your family's cow on the common pasture. You can fish in the stream. These aren't ownership rights, but use rights, access rights essential for survival. They ensure a baseline subsistence.
Okay, a safety net almost?
Kinda, yeah. Then enclosure happens. Suddenly there's a fence. That forest is now lured to somebody's private property. You go there to get wood. You're trespassing. You graze your cow. Same deal. That stream. Maybe access is restricted or you have to pay. Your means of survival, the things you relied on that were outside the cash economy, are suddenly cut off.
So nature itself, the very means of life, transformed almost overnight from this shared resource, this lifeline.
Into a commodity. Something to be bought, sold, fenced off, exploited purely for profit. And the peasant, now dispossessed, with no land to farm, no commons to rely on, what are they left with?
Their ability to work, their labor.
Precisely. They have nothing else to sell. This process created a huge pool of people with no option but to migrate to the burgeoning towns and cities and sell their labor for a wage. It generated the massive, mobile, and frankly desperate workforce that was essential for the rise of industrial capitalism.
Wow. And Hickel talks about the loss involved here, not just materially, but conceptually.
Yeah, he argues it's a profound emotional and conceptual loss. That old worldview, seeing the world as alive, interconnected, value based on use and ecological balance, it was forcibly stamped out, replaced by a system rooted in separation.
Separation.
Separation between humans and nature. Nature becomes just resources. Separation between people creating a distinct working class dependent on wages. And this separation, this objectification, allows for much more ruthless exploitation. The old moral restraints, the sense of stewardship, they're dismantled. Efficiency and profit become the only metrics.
And this initial act, this violence and dispossession, this creation of scarcity, it sets off a chain reaction.
That's the argument. If the system is founded on separating people from their means of subsistence, making them dependent on the market, then the market must constantly expand to provide those wages and absorb that labor. It can't stand still.
It needs more stuff, more places to get stuff from.
Exactly. It creates this inherent drive for perpetual expansion. The system has to constantly find new lands to enclose, new populations to dispossess and turn into workers, new resources to extract and commodify. This, Hickel argues, is the engine that directly fueled global wheeze, grabs imperialism, colonialism.
So the wealth accumulated in Europe?
Wasn't just generated internally through cleverness and hard work, as the standard story sometimes suggests. It was built directly upon the suffering and resource extraction from colonized lands, primarily in the global south. The enclosure that happened in England was replicated, often far more brutally, across the globe. The wealth concentration we see today, the deep inequalities between North and South. Hickel insists they are historically inseparable from this foundational violence.
Okay, so connecting this to today, why is understanding this history so crucial for, say, tackling climate change or inequality now?
Because, Hickel says, if we try to solve these crises just by tweaking market mechanisms, carbon taxes, cap and trade, maybe some green tech, while leaving the fundamental growth imperative intact, we're just treating the symptoms. We're missing the root cause.
Which is
the system's inherent need to commodify everything, externalize costs, and grow endlessly, a need born from that initial separation and creation of scarcity. Understanding these violent origins where nature became collateral damage and scarcity became a tool of control is, in his view, the essential first step to mending our broken bonds. We can't fix the environmental mess without challenging the economic system that demands we make the mess.
It's a fundamental challenge, then. Any solution that doesn't address that core separation, that doesn't perhaps restore some form of commons or guarantee access to public goods outside the market, it's likely to fail.
That's the implication. If the problem started with taking things away, the solution has to involve giving access back, decommodifying essentials. This historical lens really does set the stage for understanding the modern economic behemoth, as you called it.
Right. It explains why the system needs to grow. But how did that need become so embedded, so mandatory? Let's move into the rise of the juggernaut he describes.
Okay.
Before we dive into how this growth engine became unstoppable, just a quick reminder. If you're finding this deep dive valuable, please do take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. It really helps others find this content. Okay, let's continue to the next chapter.
All right, Chapter 2. Rise of the Juggernaut. Hickel uses this really powerful image, doesn't he? This sort of thundering force of
He
history.
does, the juggernaut. It represents the modern capitalist system propelled forward relentlessly, fueled, as we just discussed, by imperial resource acquisition, then supercharged by energy booms, coal, then oil. And critically, he argues this relentless drive masks its own history. It presents plunder and extraction as just progress, benign development. And a key characteristic of this juggernaut is its inherent instability. You mentioned the growth paradox.
Yes, this is crucial. Capitalism isn't designed to be stable or reach a steady state. It's structurally dependent on constant expansion. It works through cycles of investment and reinvestment.
How does that cycle force growth?
Okay, think about it simply. A company makes a profit. To stay competitive and satisfy investors, it can't just sit on that profit. It has to reinvest, build a bigger factory, develop a new product line, find new customers. This increases production. But increased production needs more raw materials, more energy, and crucially, more consumers to buy the extra stuff.
So you constantly need new markets, new resources.
Or new ways to get people to buy more. If this cycle of reinvestment and expansion stalls, if profits aren't reinvested, if markets become saturated, if resources become too expensive, the system tips into crisis. Assets lose value, companies go bankrupt, people lose their jobs.
So the choice is literally grow or collapse. Standing still isn't an option within the logic of the system.
That's precisely Hickel's point. It demands constant growth, which means it demands an ever-increasing throughput of materials and energy drawn from the planet.
And this demand, this huge material footprint,
Yeah.
it's not sourced equally, is it? You mentioned how it strips distant lands.
Absolutely not. This is where the historical patterns we discussed become contemporary realities. The process inherently involves drawing resources from the periphery to fuel consumption and growth in the core, wealthier nations.
Can you give a concrete, maybe US-based example of that?
Sure. Think about the device you might be listening to this on right now, a smartphone, a laptop. Where do the minerals come from? The cobalt, the lithium, the rare earth elements. Very often they're mined in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo or parts of South America or Asia, often under appalling environmental and labor conditions.
Right. Conditions we wouldn't tolerate here.
Exactly. The processing might happen elsewhere, assembly elsewhere again. The final product is consumed, say, in the US or Europe. The profits largely accrued to multinational corporations headquartered in the global north. But the ecological damage, the social disruption, the depletion of resources, those costs are disproportionately borne by the communities where the extraction happens.
So it's not just history, it's an ongoing structural transfer.
Yes, a net appropriation of resources, energy, and even labor from the global south to the north, embedded right into our global supply chains, our trade agreements. Hickel argues this isn't an accident. It's how the system maintains high levels of consumption and growth in wealthy nations, without those nations having to bear the full ecological or social costs domestically.
And this dynamic, this reliance on growth at all costs, was kind of locked in by policy choices, particularly from the mid-20th century onwards.
That's a key part of the narrative. There was a period, roughly after World War II, the Keynesian era, where policies in many Western countries did try to balance growth with social goals, full employment, social safety nets, regulating capital somewhat.
The post-war boom years.
Right. But starting really picking up steam in the 70s and 80s with the rise of neoliberalism, there was a dramatic policy shift. Governments, influenced by certain economic ideologies and pushed by corporate lobbying and international institutions like the IMF and World Bank, began prioritizing one thing above almost all else: GDP growth.
Just boosting the number.
Just boosting the numbers. Deregulation, privatization, free trade agreements. The goal was often explicitly framed as unleashing market forces to maximize GDP growth. Social safeguards, environmental protections, even strong unions. These were often seen and sometimes explicitly targeted as impediments to growth, barriers to be removed.
And this unleashing of quantitative expansion, it had consequences.
Demonstrably so, Hickel argues. Waves of environmental harm because polluting was cheaper than protecting. And social harm, rising inequality, stagnating wages for many, the erosion of public services, because the primary goal was aggregate growth, not distribution or well-being.
Which leads to what you called the emotional turning point, the unfairness when crises hit.
Yeah. Think about the 2008 financial crisis, caused by reckless speculation in the financial sector, primarily in the US and Europe. But who paid the highest price? Ordinary people losing homes and jobs, communities facing austerity, and the shock waves hit the most vulnerable nations hardest.
Or climate change today.
Climate change is the ultimate example, driven overwhelmingly by the historical and ongoing emissions of wealthy nations pursuing endless growth. Yet the impacts rising sea levels, desertification, extreme weather, resource conflicts fall disproportionately on low-income countries in the global south that contributed least to the problem. And even within wealthy nations like the U.S., think about who lives near polluting industries or in areas most vulnerable to flooding or heat waves. It's almost always poor communities and communities of color.
So the system externalizes its costs onto those with the least power.
Consistently.
Yeah.
Because maintaining the growth imperative for the benefit of those at the top requires pushing the negative consequences onto someone else, somewhere else. It's a structural necessity of the juggernaut.
Looking at global divides today, this pattern seems stark. High consumption in places like, say, major U.S. cities.
It requires this constant, often hidden extraction elsewhere. Think about the sheer volume of stuff consumed and discarded. Fast fashion, single-use plastics, electronics designed to be replaced quickly, the energy required, the raw materials, the waste generated. It creates these sacrifice zones, both globally and domestically. Landfills, polluting factories, extraction sites disproportionately impact marginalized communities.
So the crucial question Hickel keeps coming back to is, can this path, this juggernaut demanding infinite material growth on a clearly finite planet, can it ever lead to genuine long-term stability?
Logically, ecologically. The sources he draws on, the data he presents, strongly suggest the answer has to be no. The instability, the crises, the inequality, they aren't bugs in the system, they are features. They are the price of prioritizing mandatory growth above all else.
It really does feel like a treadmill speeding up as the ground crumbles beneath it. Okay, so if the structure itself is the problem, what about the big hope a lot of people cling to? Technology. Can't we just invent our way out of this?
The technology gambit. That's exactly where Hickel goes next.
Before we explore whether technology can really save the day, a quick reminder for everyone tuning in. Hitting that like button and subscribing really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives. Sharing with anyone you think might find this interesting helps too. Now let's get into Chapter 3.
All right, Chapter 3. So we've established the argument. The economic system itself, this juggernaut of growth, is the root problem. But, understandably, leaders, policymakers, even many environmentalists often pivot here. They cling to this idea, this hope maybe, that technology will be the answer.
It's a very seductive idea, isn't it? The narrative is basically, yes, growth causes environmental problems, but human ingenuity is boundless. We can invent new technologies that will allow us to continue growing the economy, continue increasing GDP, but just cleanly, without the pollution, without the resource depletion. Keep the cake and eat it too, essentially.
Pretty much. Keep the economic system fundamentally the same, just swap out the dirty parts for clean parts through innovation. And this leads to pinning hopes on some really large-scale, often quite speculative technological solutions.
What kind of big bets are we talking about here?
Hickel discusses several, but two prominent categories are carbon dioxide removal, CDR, and solar radiation management, SRM, or geoengineering.
Okay, break those down. CDR.
CDR involves technologies designed to actively suck existing CO2 out of the atmosphere. The most talked about version is probably direct air capture, or DS, building huge facilities, essentially giant chemical fans, to filter CO2 from the ambient air and store it somewhere, maybe underground.
Fantastic. Ambitious.
And expensive.
Hugely ambitious. Incredibly energy intensive and currently very expensive. The scale needed to make a meaningful dent in atmospheric CO2 concentrations is just staggering, far beyond anything currently operational. Plus, where do you put all that captured carbon terminally? There are big questions. Okay, and the other one, geoengineering. That sounds even more sci-fi.
It kind of is. Solar geoengineering involves deliberately intervening in the climate system to counteract warming. The main proposal is usually stratospheric aerosol injection, basically, flying planes high into the atmosphere to release reflective particles, like sulfates, to mimic the cooling effect of large volcanic eruptions and reflect some sunlight back into space.
Wow. Okay, my gut reaction to that is unease. Major unease. Hickel talks about hidden risks here, right? The tension is huge.
The immense risks. With geoengineering, we're talking about intentionally manipulating the entire planet's climate system. The potential for unintended consequences is terrifying. What if it drastically shifts rainfall patterns, causing droughts or floods in different regions? Could it damage the ozone layer? Who gets to control the planetary thermostat? What if one country starts doing it and another suffers negative effects? It opens up huge geopolitical risks, potential for conflict.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare scenario waiting to happen.
And even with DAC, the less overtly risky one, think about the resources required. Building millions of these machines would need vast amounts of steel, concrete, energy, potentially creating new environmental problems in the process of trying to solve one. And crucially, both approaches risk acting as a dangerous distraction,
How so? A distraction.
because they offer the illusion that we can continue with business as usual, keep burning fossil fuels, keep pursuing endless material growth because we have this future technological fix waiting in the wings. It potentially reduces the urgency to make the fundamental changes needed now in how we produce and consume. It's a moral hazard, some argue.
Kicking the can down the road, hoping for a miracle technology later.
Precisely. Which brings us to the core concept Hickel really attacks in this chapter, the idea of decoupling.
Decoupling. That's the idea that we can separate economic growth, GDP going up, from resource use and environmental impact, those going down or staying flat.
Exactly. There are two kinds, relative decoupling and absolute decoupling. Relative decoupling means environmental impacts grow, but slower than GDP. We see some evidence of this for some pollutants in some wealthy countries. But what we need for sustainability is absolute decoupling. GDP goes up, while total resource use and environmental impact go down globally, and significantly so.
And Hickel's argument is that absolute decoupling globally isn't happening and likely can't happen under the current system.
That's the core. The data just doesn't support it on a global scale for overall material footprint or energy use. While a specific country, say the U.S., might decouple its GDP from its domestic carbon emissions by offshoring manufacturing to China.
Right, we don't make the pollution here, we just import the goods.
Exactly. The global footprint associated with U.S. consumption hasn't necessarily decreased, it's just shifted geographically. And overall global resource use continues to climb because the sheer volume of global production and consumption, driven by the growth imperative, is increasing faster than any efficiency gains we make.
So efficiency improvements get wiped out by the sheer scale of activity.
Often, yes. And this is where a specific problem comes in, a concept called the rebound effect, or sometimes the Jevons paradox. This really undermines the hopes pinned on efficiency alone.
Okay, the rebound effect. Can you explain that with a clear example, maybe something relatable in the U.S.?
Sure. Let's take cars. We develop more fuel-efficient cars.
Yeah.
Great, right. You buy a new car that gets, say, 40 miles per gallon instead of your old one that got 20 mpg. Your cost per mile driven goes down significantly.
So you save money on gas.
Save money on gas. But what happens then? Because driving is cheaper, maybe you decide to live further out from the city where housing is cheaper, meaning a longer commute. Or maybe you take more weekend road trips. Or perhaps the money saved on gas gets spent on something else that also has an energy footprint, like flying on vacation.
So the efficiency gain doesn't translate into an equivalent reduction in overall fuel consumption because behavior changes.
Exactly. In some cases, the increased usage can partially or even fully offset the efficiency gain. This happens at the individual level and also at the macroeconomic level. If energy becomes cheaper due to efficiency, it can spur more overall economic activity, leading to a net increase in energy use.
Jevons' paradox originally observed this with coal, right? More efficient steam engines led to more coal use because they enabled more industries.
Precisely. More efficient engines made coal a cheaper power source, which fueled the expansion of factories and railways, driving up total coal consumption dramatically. It's a counterintuitive but really critical point. Efficiency gains under a system geared towards endless expansion often just fuel more expansion.
So relying on these, uncertain technological wonders like D-Day or geoengineering, Hickel argues it's not just risky, it's a dangerous distraction.
Yes, because it keeps our eyes off the prize, so to speak. It prevents us from confronting the fundamental need to actually reduce the total amount of energy and materials the economy consumes, to step back from the growth imperative itself.
And instead, maybe open our eyes to simpler, more direct ways of living well. Ways that don't depend on constant resource-hungry innovation just to keep the planet habitable.
That's the alternative view he starts pointing towards. Maybe the solution isn't ever more complex technology to manage the impacts of growth, but shifting our goals away from growth altogether.
How relevant is this to the U.S. context now? We're seeing huge investments in green tech, EVs, renewables.
It's incredibly relevant. Those investments are necessary, absolutely. Transitioning to renewable energy is vital. But Hickel's caution would be, if we simply replace every internal combustion engine car with a resource-intensive electric car and continue to push for ever-increasing overall consumption, ever larger homes, more flights, more disposable goods, then the green tech alone won't save us.
The sheer volume of throughput still matters.
The sheer volume is key. If the economy still demands endless growth, The resource demands of even green technologies, mining lithium, copper, producing steel for wind turbines, will eventually hit ecological limits or create new environmental justice problems. Innovation is part of the picture, but it can't outrun the damage if the underlying economic operating system demands infinite expansion.
It really forces that fundamental question again. Are we just trying to find clever ways to sustain the unsustainable, or are we willing to ask what the economy should actually be for?
And that leads us directly to the next chapter, which explores that very question. If not GDP growth, then what? What are the real secrets to a good life?
Before we uncover those secrets of the good life, just another quick nudge. If this conversation is sparking ideas, please hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps support this deep dive. Okay, on to chapter 4. Okay, chapter 4. If the endless chase for bigger GDP numbers isn't the answer, maybe even part of the problem, Hickel shifts here, right, towards a different goal.
He does. This chapter is really about a fundamental revelation, almost a paradigm shift. The argument is that true fulfillment, the good life, isn't found primarily through accumulating private wealth or maximizing economic output. It's found through things like strong social connections, good health, access to education, security, and critically robust public investment, and shared well-being.
So moving away from GDP as the main metric of success.
Completely. He argues GDP is a terrible proxy for human flourishing. You can have a country with a sky-high GDP, but also massive inequality, terrible public health outcomes, crumbling infrastructure, high levels of stress and depression, and low life satisfaction for the majority. The number itself tells you very little about how people are actually doing.
He uses a really striking example to illustrate this point, doesn't he? The Costa Rica example.
Yes. It's become a classic case study in this field, and Hickel highlights it effectively. Costa Rica is fascinating because it has a significantly lower GDP per capita compared to, say, the United States. Yet it consistently outperforms the U.S. and many other richer nations on key quality of life metrics.
Like what specifically?
Well, for starters, life expectancy in Costa Rica is often higher than in the U.S. They also consistently rank near the top globally on indices of happiness and subjective well-being, like the Happy Planet Index.
Higher life expectancy and happiness with much less money per person. How did they manage that?
By making very deliberate policy choices over decades. The most famous one, perhaps, is that they constitutionally abolished their military back in 1948. Think about that. No army, no defense spending draining the budget.
Wow. So what did they do with that money instead? The peace dividend.
They reinvested it heavily, consistently into social services. Universal health care, they have a well-regarded public health system. Accessible, high-quality public education, and strong environmental protections, they've made huge strides in reforestation and protecting biodiversity.
So they prioritized people and planet directly, rather than assuming wealth would trickle down or automatically translate into well-being.
Exactly. They chose to invest in the foundations of a good life for everyone. And the result is that they've managed to lift lives, achieve high levels of human development far beyond what their sheer economic output, their GDP, would predict. It's powerful evidence that you don't need endless growth to achieve high levels of well-being. In fact, prioritizing well-being directly seems to be much more effective.
That comparison really throws the situation in wealthier countries like the U.S. into sharp relief, doesn't it? It brings up that emotional turning point Hickel talks about, the sheer injustice.
It does, because in the U.S. we see the opposite trend in many ways. Astronomical GDP growth over the past few decades, but the gains have been hoarded overwhelmingly by a tiny fraction at the top. We have unprecedented wealth concentration alongside.
Alongside crumbling public infrastructure, unaffordable healthcare for millions, underfunded schools in many areas, student debt crises, stagnating life expectancy in some demographics.
Right. The GDP number goes up. But for many people, life isn't getting better. It might even be getting harder, more precarious. And the environmental costs continue to mount. Hickel argues this isn't just unfortunate. It's an injustice stemming directly from prioritizing profit and growth over people and public goods.
And the vision that emerges from this critique is one based on fair sharing.
Fair sharing and redistribution, yes. But it's not just about fairness for its own sake. Hickel connects it back to the ecological crisis. The argument is that extreme inequality actually drives environmental pressure.
How so? Inequality drives destruction.
Think about it. If wealth is highly concentrated, the super rich engage in extremely high-impact consumption, multiple homes, private jets, yachts, etc. At the same time, the vast majority might be struggling, feeling insecure. This insecurity fuels status anxiety and competitive consumption. People feel pressure to buy bigger cars, bigger houses, more stuff, partly to keep up or signal success in a deeply unequal society.
And the constant pressure to just make ends meet forces people into ecologically damaging jobs or consumption patterns they might otherwise avoid.
Exactly. If basic security housing, healthcare, education is guaranteed through universal public services, that anxiety-driven need to constantly accumulate more private wealth lessens significantly. People might start valuing other things, more free time, community involvement, creative pursuits, connection with nature. This shift in values, enabled by public abundance, can naturally lead to lower overall consumption and less pressure on the planet.
So the core idea becomes the power of public investment, not just as a safety net, but as the primary engine of real progress, even if GDP doesn't soar.
Precisely. Public investment sparks genuine progress in human lives. And we don't even need to look only at Costa Rica. Hickel draws on historical precedents, including many highly relevant to the U.S. experience.
You mentioned U.S. public health history earlier.
Yes, think about the dramatic leaps in life expectancy that occurred in major American cities during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What drove that? It wasn't primarily fancy new medicines or expensive private hospitals becoming available to everyone. Those came later.
What was it then?
It was massive public works projects, building centralized, clean public water systems to eliminate waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid, constructing comprehensive sewer systems to handle waste safely, implementing widespread public sanitation measures. Later, mass public vaccination campaigns and investments in public education that improved health literacy.
These were huge collective public investments in basic infrastructure and services.
Exactly. They required significant upfront public spending, often funded by taxes. They didn't necessarily generate immediate private profit or explosive GDP growth in the way a new factory might, but the return on investment in terms of human health, well-being, and productivity was absolutely enormous and shared broadly across society.
It transformed urban life, made cities livable in a way they hadn't been.
Fundamentally. And it provides the core proof for Hickel's argument. Genuine human flourishing doesn't require constant economic expansion measured by GDP. Prioritizing universal access to public goods, clean water, sanitation, healthcare, education, safe environments, maybe even things like public transit or access to green space unlocks a much more vibrant and equitable existence for everyone. It fundamentally reframes what constitutes economic success.
So the goal shifts from how big is the economy to how well are people living.
Precisely. Are people healthy? Are they educated? Are they secure? Do they have time for relationships and community? Is the environment they live in clean and stable? These become the key indicators, not just the abstract number of GDP.
Okay, the vision is compelling. Investing in people directly leads to better lives than just chasing growth. But the practicalities, how do we actually make that shift? Given how deeply entrenched the current system is, what does the roadmap look like?
That's exactly what the next chapter delves into, the practical pathways and policy shifts needed to build this post-capitalist, post-growth world.
All right, before we map out those pathways to change, let's pause one more time. If you appreciate this detailed breakdown, please consider liking, subscribing, and maybe sharing this deep dive with a friend or colleague. It makes a real difference. Now, let's get practical in Chapter 5.
Okay.
Chapter 5. We've seen the history, diagnosed the problem with the juggernaut, questioned the tech fix, and established a new goal, well-being over sheer output. Now, Hickel gets down to brass tacks, right? Practical policy steps for what he calls degrowth.
Yes, and it's really important to clarify what he means by degrowth, because the term itself can sound scary, austere, like making everyone poorer.
Right. It often gets framed that way as sacrifice, belts tightening.
But that's not how Hickel and other proponents define it. Degrowth isn't about just shrinking everything indiscriminately, which would indeed cause hardship. It's about a planned and selective downscaling of the parts of the economy that are ecologically destructive and socially unnecessary, like fossil fuels, industrial agriculture, fast fashion, arms manufacturing, advertising, while simultaneously and deliberately expanding the sectors that actually enhance human well-being and ecological health.
So shrinking the bad stuff, growing the good stuff.
Essentially, yes. Shrinking resource throughput, waste, and pollution, while growing things like renewable energy, regenerative farming, public health care, education, community support, arts, and leisure time. It's about shifting the economy's composition towards care, sufficiency, and sustainability, not just making it smaller overall in a recessionary way.
Okay, that reframing is crucial. He talks about releasing the grip of overreach, sparking creative freedom. How does that work?
Well, part of the plan involves moving away from built-in wastefulness. Think about planned obsolescence products, deliberately designed to break down or become unfashionable quickly, forcing you to buy replacements.
Like smartphones that are hard to repair or printers that stop working after a certain number of pages?
Exactly. A key policy shift here is towards mandating durable design, requiring products, especially electronics and appliances, to be built to last, easily repairable, and designed for disassembly and recycling at the end of their life. This isn't technologically impossible. It's often just less profitable in the short term under the current model.
And the right to repair movement fits in here, making it easier and legal for consumers or independent shops to fix things.
Absolutely. Right to repair laws, like those being debated or implemented in various U.S. states and in Europe, are a core degrowth policy. They directly challenge the throwaway culture, reduce electronic waste, which is a huge environmental problem, and cut down on the need for constant extraction of new materials to make replacement goods. It empowers consumers and fosters local repair economies.
Okay, so tackling the supply side, making things last longer. What about the demand side? The pressure to always want more.
Hickel argues we need to address the manufactured demand created by the advertising industry. Companies spend billions trying to convince us we're inadequate without their latest product, fueling dissatisfaction and endless desire.
The juggernaut needs us to keep buying.
It does. So policies could include things like banning advertising for particularly harmful products, maybe SUVs, fossil fuels, junk food, payday loans, or implementing significant taxes on corporate advertising budgets, especially for luxury or wasteful goods. The goal is to reduce the constant psychological pressure to consume things we don't actually need for a good life.
And embracing shared resources, moving away from hyper-individual ownership.
Yes, that's another key strategy to lighten the collective footprint. Instead of everyone needing to own their own car, invest massively in high-quality, affordable, convenient public transportation. Instead of every household needing a lawnmower, power tools, etc., support the growth of community tool libraries or sharing platforms. Expand public libraries beyond books to include other shared goods.
So access over ownership.
Precisely. It provides the same utility getting around fixing things with a fraction of the resource use and waste. It also fosters community connection.
Okay, these ideas make sense ecologically.
Yeah.
But the big looming fear is always jobs. If we scale back polluting industries, stop making so much throwaway stuff, won't that lead to mass unemployment? That's the political dynamite, right?
It's the #1 political challenge, absolutely. And Hickel confronts it directly. He argues that the fear of job losses is real, but the solution isn't to cling to destructive industries. Instead, it's about managing a just transition and rethinking the nature of work itself.
How? What's the counter dream he offers?
Part of it is shifting labor. As we scale down destructive sectors, we need massive investment to scale up the caring and regenerative sectors. Renewable energy installation and maintenance, ecosystem restoration, organic farming, retrofitting buildings for energy efficiency, expanding healthcare, elder care, childcare, education, arts. These are inherently labor-intensive sectors that improve well-being.
So redirecting work towards socially useful goals.
Exactly. But crucially, it's also about reducing the total amount of labor needed overall by tackling inefficiency and sharing the remaining work more equitably. This is where policies like a shorter working week come in.
The 4-day work week idea. Or even shorter.
Yes. Numerous trials around the world have shown that shorter working weeks, say 32 hours for the same pay, can maintain or even increase productivity in many sectors, while dramatically improving employee well-being, reducing burnout, and lowering carbon footprints, e.g. less commuting. It's a core degrowth policy because it allows us to decouple livelihoods from endless production growth. It distributes existing work more fairly and gives people more time for life outside of paid labor.
So the job crisis could become an opportunity for more leisure, more community time, less stress, if managed correctly.
That's the vision. More meaningful work, but less drudgery overall. Now, to make this possible, you need other policies working in tandem.
Like redistribution and regulation. Let's get into those specifics.
Okay, first, ending systemic waste is huge. We talked about planned obsolescence, but also think about food waste. In the U.S., estimates suggest 30–40% of the entire food supply is wasted, often for cosmetic reasons or due to inefficiencies in the supply chain. Policies need to target this aggressively, regulations on supermarkets, support for gleaning networks, better infrastructure for composting and redistribution. Similar things apply to energy waste through inefficient buildings.
And taxes. How does redistribution work?
Fair and progressive taxation is critical. This means things like much higher taxes on corporate profits and capital gains, implementing wealth taxes on extreme fortunes, significantly higher taxes on resource extraction and carbon emissions, making pollution expensive, potentially luxury taxes on high-impact goods.
And the revenue from these taxes
Is used to fund the expansion of public services and potentially a citizen's dividend or basic income, ensuring the transition is just and benefits everyone, not just the wealthy. It levels the playing field and provides the public investment needed for the good stuff economy.
Okay, and then the really big one you mentioned earlier, freeing basic necessities from the market, universal basic services.
This is perhaps the most transformative piece, the real linchpin. The idea is to decommodify the essentials for a decent life, guaranteeing access for all citizens, regardless of income, to high-quality public services like healthcare, truly universal, free at the point of service, education, from pre-K through university vocational training, affordable public housing, a baseline amount of clean energy and water, and perhaps even basic food security and public transportation.
So a robust social safety net becomes a social springboard.
Exactly. If you know your family will have a roof over their head, access to doctors, good schools for your kids, enough food, and ways to get around, regardless of whether GDP grew by 3% this year or whether you have a high-paying job, that fundamentally changes everything.
How? What's the effect?
It dramatically reduces economic insecurity and anxiety. It frees people from the compulsion to take any job, no matter how soul-crushing or intellectually damaging, just to survive. It gives workers more bargaining power. It allows people to pursue education, caregiving, community work, or creative endeavors without facing destitution. It breaks the direct dependence on perpetual income growth for basic security.
It essentially creates a foundation of sufficiency, freeing people and the economy from the relentless pressure cooker of growth at all costs.
That's the core idea. It allows society to choose to scale back harmful activities without causing mass suffering. This comprehensive map, durable design, curbing ads, shorter work weeks, fair taxes, universal basic services, paints a picture of a practical, achievable world of plenty without the endless grind. It's fueled by community action and smart public policy, not blind faith in market expansion.
It's a profoundly different vision of the economy. But implementing it requires more than just policy changes, doesn't it? Hickel argues it needs a deeper shift.
A shift in worldview, in how we fundamentally relate to each other and to the planet itself. That's where the final chapter takes us.
Before we explore that final, crucial shift in worldview, one last reminder. Your support through likes and subscriptions keeps this channel going. We appreciate every single one. Now let's dive into the interconnectedness of it all in Chapter 6. All right, Chapter 6. Everything is connected. We've gone through the critique, the problems, the potential policy solutions. Hickel concludes by weaving it all together into something deeper, right? A call for a different way of seeing the world.
Exactly. This is the philosophical and, you could say, spiritual capstone of the argument.
Yeah.
If the root problem began with a worldview based on separation, humans separate from nature, individuals separate from each other, mind separate from body, then the solution requires embracing a worldview based on interconnectedness, on relationship, on holism.
Moving away from that mechanical view of the world that allowed for enclosure and exploitation.
Precisely. Capitalism, particularly in its neoliberal form, thrives on that fragmented view. Nature is just resources. Labor is just a cost. Society is just a collection of competing individuals. Hickel argues that post-capitalism, a sustainable future, requires us to see the world as a living system, a profound web of relationships of which we are just one part.
And he finds hope in nature's own resilience.
Yes, he shares these really encouraging stories, and there's growing scientific evidence for this, about how ecosystems can rebound, sometimes remarkably quickly, when the pressure of destructive human activity is removed.
Like what kind of examples?
Think about areas where industrial fishing has been banned, and fish stocks start to recover faster than expected. Or rivers that were heavily polluted for decades starting to run cleaner relatively soon after the polluting factories shut down. Or projects like the rewilding of certain landscapes where bringing back keystone species helps restore complex ecological functions.
So nature isn't just a fragile victim.
It's not just fragile. It possesses this incredible capacity for self-healing, self-organization, and regeneration if we give it the space, if we reduce the relentless pressure of extraction and pollution driven by the growth imperative. This offers immense hope. It suggests that the ecological damage we've done, while incredibly serious, isn't necessarily a permanent sentence if we change course. Healing is possible.
And part of changing course involves embracing different cultural perspectives, moving beyond just the industrialized Western model.
Critically important.
Yeah.
This is where the emotional and ethical turning point of this chapter lies. Hickel emphasizes the need to learn from and respect diverse cultural worldviews, particularly those of indigenous peoples around the globe who have often maintained philosophies and practices rooted in interconnectedness for millennia.
Treating rivers, mountains, forests as relatives, as beings with rights.
Exactly. Many indigenous cultures hold worldviews where non-human entities are seen as kin, as persons with agency, rights, and responsibilities within the larger community of life. This contrasts sharply with the objectification and instrumental view of nature inherent in the dominant capitalist paradigm. Embracing these relational ethics involves moving towards gratitude, reciprocity, and balance, taking only what is needed, giving back, and considering the well-being of the whole system, including future generations.
It's a profound shift from seeing nature as it to seeing it as thou, as Martin Buber might say.
That's a great way to put it. It requires moving away from the sense of human exceptionalism and separation towards humility and integration within the web of life.
And this isn't just, nice philosophy. There's hard science backing up this idea of interconnectedness now, too.
Increasingly so. Ecology and biology are constantly revealing the intricate hidden networks that underpin life. The example Hickel often uses is the discovery of vast underground fungal networks, the mycelial networks, or sometimes called the Wood Wide Web.
Right, the way trees communicate and share resources through fungi in the soil.
Exactly. We now know that trees within a forest are often linked by these networks, allowing them to share nutrients, send warning signals about pests or drought, and even support younger or weaker trees. It demonstrates that a forest isn't just a collection of individual trees competing for sunlight. It's a complex, cooperative, interconnected community.
That completely changes how you might think about forestry, for example.
It really should. The scientific evidence, from microbiology to ecosystem science, consistently points to the same conclusion. Everything is connected. Our health depends on soil health. Climate stability depends on intact forests and oceans. Individual well-being is tied to community well-being. The separation is an illusion, a dangerous one.
And understanding this deep interconnectedness creates an ethical imperative.
A profound one. If we are truly part of this web, not masters of it, then our actions have consequences that ripple outwards. It demands an ethic of care and responsibility. It means adopting practices based on sufficiency, taking only what is needed for genuine well-being, not maximizing extraction for endless accumulation. It implies recognizing the intrinsic rights of nature itself, not just its value as human property.
So this final chapter really ties it all together. The economic critique leads to policy proposals, which are ultimately grounded in this call for a fundamental shift in consciousness towards an ecological worldview.
Precisely. In the face of today's converging crises, climate breakdown, biodiversity collapse, staggering inequality, Hickel argues that the path forward requires a kind of decolonization of our minds, moving beyond the extractive, dominating logic of colonialism and capitalism and rebuilding our ethical and practical ties to the living world and to each other. This, he suggests, is how we foster true abundance, social, ecological, spiritual, and create a world that cares for all beings, finally transcending the destructive mandate of endless growth. #OUTRO.
Wow. What an absolutely fascinating and challenging journey through Jason Hickel's arguments. We started way back with that violent creation of scarcity through the enclosure of the commons.
Yeah, establishing how the system wasn't natural but manufactured.
Right. Then we saw how that birthed the modern juggernaut, this relentless, unstable engine demanding constant growth or collapse, often fueled by stripping resources from elsewhere.
We looked critically at the promises of technological fixes, seeing the limitations of decoupling and the dangers of rebound effects and distractions like geoengineering.
And then the pivot, the powerful realization that genuine well-being, as shown by places like Costa Rica or even historical public health gains, comes from public investment in people and shared resources, not just chasing a bigger GDP number. That well-being drastically outweighs raw wealth.
Leading to those practical pathways, durable goods, shorter work weeks, fair taxes, and especially universal basic services to decommodify life's essentials.
Exactly. So I think the essential takeaway, the core message that resonates from this deep dive into Hickel's work is stark but clear. Growth, as we currently define it, measure it, and demand it, it simply isn't progress anymore. It might actually be the opposite.
And it's crucial to remember this isn't just an abstract critique. Those policy steps outlined, particularly in Chapter 5, things like ending planned obsolescence, taxing wealth and pollution fairly, investing massively in public goods, guaranteeing basic services. These aren't utopian fantasies. They are concrete, practical steps that offer a tangible pathway for individuals, communities, and even nations to start moving beyond the destructive growth imperative, starting right now. It's about building resilience and security from the ground up.
Okay, so building on all that, here's our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. If scarcity, particularly the insecurity around basic needs, was indeed, as argues so forcefully, a creation of the capitalist system rooted in enclosure, then what forms of genuine, non-extractive abundance might we be overlooking in our lives right now?
Think about it. Abundance doesn't just have to mean more money or more stuff. What about social abundance? Strong communities, deep relationships, mutual support. What about ecological abundance? Clean air and water, access to thriving nature, biodiversity. What about time abundance, having enough free time for rest, creativity, learning, democratic participation, caring for loved ones?
Are we perhaps so caught up in the economic speedometer, the constant pressure to earn more just to afford the basics like housing, healthcare, or childcare in an increasingly expensive market system?
That we fail to see or demand the possibilities of securing those basics differently. Through robust, decommodified public services, through shared resources, through community wealth building. Consider this. What is one basic market-dependent need in your own life that causes you stress or insecurity? And what collective action supporting a local initiative, advocating for a policy change in your city or state, could you potentially take, even starting tomorrow, to help free that need from the relentless demands of the market system for yourself and your community?
A challenging question to end on. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We really hope this exploration of Jason Hickel's ideas serves you well, gives you food for thought, and maybe a new lens to look through.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep questioning what progress truly means and keep asking whether the economy around you is designed for endless profit or designed for people and the planet we depend on.